The champagne glass trembled in my hand as my sister Victoria's voice carried across the crowded ballroom of the Grand Cascade Hotel. "Amanda has always been the family disappointment," she announced to a circle of her colleagues from Sterling and associates, her laughter sharp and cutting through the elegant jazz quartet playing in the background. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Still living in that tiny apartment, working those random freelance jobs. I keep telling Mom and Dad she's basically worthless at this point. I stood frozen behind a towering floral arrangement, the Seattle skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows as witness to my humiliation. The engagement party that was supposed to celebrate Victoria's upcoming marriage to David Chen had somehow become a public execution of my life choices. What happened next would not only shatter the careful dynamics our family had maintained for years, but reveal a truth that would transform everything I thought I knew about success, worth, and the power of underestimation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hiding behind flowers at my own sister's engagement party. Victoria had always been the golden child, the one who landed the prestigious marketing position at Sterling and Associates straight out of college, the one who found the perfect fiancé with the perfect job and the perfect life trajectory. Meanwhile, I had spent the last 3 years cobbling together freelance consulting work, telling myself I was building something meaningful while watching my savings account dwindle month by month. The Grand Cascade Hotel's Crystal Ballroom was exactly the kind of venue Victoria would choose. All marble columns and chandeliers that probably cost more than my annual rent. She stood at the center of it all in a stunning emerald dress that perfectly complemented her auburn hair, holding court with Seattle's young professional elite. David Chen, her fiancé and a rising star at a tech startup, gazed at her adoringly while she regaled their audience with stories of their romantic European vacation and their plans for a destination wedding in Tuscany. I had arrived fashionably, late, partly because my ancient Honda Civic had trouble starting again, and partly because I needed to psyche myself up for another evening of being the family's consolation prize. The invitation had been beautiful, heavy cardstock with gold foil lettering that probably cost more per piece than I spent on dinner most nights. Victoria had hand-delivered it to my Capitol Hill apartment 2 weeks ago, sweeping into my modest living space with the kind of barely concealed pity that had defined our relationship since childhood. "You'll come, won't you?" she had asked, though it sounded more like a command than a request. "Mom and Dad are expecting the whole family to be there. It would look strange if you didn't show up." The subtext was clear. My presence was required. Not because I was wanted, but because my absence would create awkward questions. I was the family's uncomfortable truth, the reminder that not everyone achieves the conventional markers of success by age 28. Now, standing behind this elaborate orchid display, I watched Victoria gesture dramatically as she continued her impromptu roast of my life. She had this whole plan to start her own consulting firm, Victoria was saying, making air quotes around the word plan. That was 2 years ago. Now she's basically a professional failure living off whatever scraps she can find. Marcus Rodriguez, whom I vaguely recognized as one of Victoria's colleagues, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should talk about something else," he suggested diplomatically, but Victoria was just getting started. "No, it's actually educational," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "Amanda is a perfect example of what happens when you don't have realistic expectations about your capabilities. She thinks she's some kind of business genius, but the market has spoken, hasn't it?" The cruelty in her tone was breathtaking, made worse by the casual way she delivered it, as if she were discussing the weather rather than systematically dismantling her own sister's dignity in front of strangers. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, my chest tightening with a familiar mixture of hurt and rage that had characterized our relationship since we were children. David Chen looked increasingly uncomfortable, tugging at his collar in the way people do when they witness someone else's cruelty. "Victoria, maybe..." "Oh, I'm not being mean," Victoria interrupted with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I'm being honest. Sometimes honesty feels mean, but Amanda needs to hear this. She's been living in a fantasy world where effort equals success, but the real world doesn't work that way. Some people are just built for achievement, and others." She shrugged, letting the sentence hang in the air like smoke. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and I grabbed another glass with hands that were steadier than I expected. The alcohol wasn't helping my emotional state, but it was providing a kind of numbness that felt necessary for survival. I had endured Victoria's casual cruelty for years, but never quite so publicly, never with such calculated precision. The worst part wasn't even the words themselves, but the murmurs of agreement from some of her colleagues. Nods and knowing, looks that suggested this wasn't the first time Victoria had shared her assessment of my failures. I realized with sick clarity that I had become a recurring character in her professional social life, the cautionary tale she wheeled out whenever she wanted to highlight her own success by contrast. "The thing is," Victoria continued, warming, to her theme, "our parents keep enabling her. They still think she's going to figure it out, have some kind of breakthrough moment. But at some point, you have to accept reality. Amanda just doesn't have what it takes to succeed in a competitive environment." An older woman I didn't recognize leaned forward with interest. "What kind of consulting was she trying to do?" "Business strategy," Victoria replied with another laugh. "Can you imagine? She thinks she can advise successful companies on how to improve their operations when she can't even manage her own life. It's like someone who's never learned to swim offering to teach Olympic diving." The metaphor hit particularly hard because Victoria knew I had been afraid of water since childhood, a phobia she had always found amusing. The casual way she weaponized my vulnerabilities, even metaphorically, revealed the depth of her contempt. Marcus Rodriguez tried again to redirect the conversation. "How did you and David meet?" he asked, but Victoria wasn't ready to abandon her favorite topic. "Through work, actually," she said, sliding her arm through David's. David's company was looking for marketing consultation, and Sterling and Associates assigned me to the project. I impressed him so much with my strategic thinking that he asked me out before the contract was even finalized. She glanced meaningfully at her audience. That's what real professional competence looks like. When you're actually good at what you do, opportunities create themselves. People recognize talent and want to work with you, want to be around you. The implication was clear and devastating. If I were truly competent, I would have similar opportunities, similar recognition, similar success. My struggles weren't the result of an unforgiving market or bad timing or the countless other factors that can derail even the most talented person's plans. They were simply evidence of my fundamental inadequacy. I found myself thinking about the rejection emails I had received over the past few months. Potential clients who had seemed interested initially but ultimately decided to go with more established firms. The proposals I had crafted with such care, only to learn they had chosen competitors with bigger names and longer track records. Had Victoria somehow influenced any of those decisions? Did her casual character assassination extend beyond social gatherings into professional networks? The paranoid thought was probably unfair, but Victoria moved in Seattle's tight-knit business community where reputation mattered enormously. A few well-placed comments about my reliability or competence could easily poison potential opportunities, without me ever knowing the source. "Speaking of professional competence," said a voice I didn't recognize, "I believe some introductions are in order." I turned to see a woman approaching our group, and the entire dynamic of the conversation shifted instantly. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it wasn't her expensive clothing that commanded attention. It was the way every conversation in her vicinity seemed to pause, the way people automatically created space for her to move through the crowd. Victoria's expression transformed from confident superiority to barely concealed panic. "Ms. Blackwood," she stammered, suddenly looking very young despite her professional attire. "I didn't realize you were here." Elena Blackwood smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made you want to check your teeth for spinach. "Your colleague Marcus was kind enough to invite me," she said smoothly. "I understand this is a celebration of your engagement. Congratulations." The pleasantries were delivered with perfect politeness, but there was something in Elena Blackwood's tone that suggested she had heard more of Victoria's monologue than anyone realized. I watched my sister's face cycle through expressions of confusion, embarrassment, and calculation as she tried to determine how much damage control was necessary. "Thank you so much for coming," Victoria managed, her voice pitched higher than usual. "This is such an honor. I mean, having the CEO of Phoenix Dynamics at my engagement party is incredible." Phoenix Dynamics. Even from my position behind the floral arrangement, I felt a jolt of recognition. Phoenix Dynamics was one of Seattle's most influential corporations, a consulting and investment firm that specialized in turning around struggling companies. Their CEO was notoriously private, rarely appearing at social events, and commanded the kind of respect that could make or break careers. "Actually," Elena Blackwood said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom, "I'm here because I've been following some very impressive work in the business consulting space. Strategic analysis that demonstrates the kind of innovative thinking we're always looking for at Phoenix Dynamics." Victoria's eyes lit up with desperate hope. This was her moment, her chance to impress someone who could transform her career trajectory from successful to legendary. Well, I have been working on some strategic initiatives at Sterling and Associates," she began eagerly. "Oh, I'm not talking about your work," Elena Blackwood replied with that same dangerous smile. "I'm talking about Amanda Hayes's work." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. I felt the champagne glass slip from my numb fingers, watching as if in slow motion as it shattered against the marble floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over our section of the party. "Amanda?" Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "My sister Amanda? Is she here?" Elena Blackwood asked, scanning the crowd with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I've been hoping to meet her in person. Her analysis of market inefficiencies in the Pacific Northwest consulting sector was absolutely brilliant. We've been trying to reach her for weeks." I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement on legs that felt like they were made of water. Every eye in the circle was on me, but Elena Blackwood's gaze held a warmth that contrasted sharply with the calculating coldness I was used to seeing in business settings. "Ms. Hayes," she said, extending her hand. "Elena Blackwood, CEO of Phoenix Dynamics. I believe we have quite a lot to discuss." The handshake was firm, professional, and somehow grounding. I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. "Ms. Blackwood, this is unexpected." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The best opportunities usually are," she replied. "I've been reading your work on operational efficiency frameworks, particularly your case study on how mid-sized consulting firms can leverage technology to compete with larger established players. Fascinating insights." I blinked, trying to process what was happening. 6 months ago, I had written that analysis as part of a proposal for a client who ultimately rejected my services. I had posted an abbreviated version on my professional blog, more out of frustration than any real hope that it would reach the right audience. The idea that Elena Blackwood, CEO of one of Seattle's most successful companies, had not only read it but been impressed enough to seek me out seemed impossible. Victoria was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, not her usual mixture of pity and condescension, but something that looked almost like fear. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Amanda wrote something that impressed you?" Several somethings, Elena Blackwood corrected gently. Her approach to identifying systematic inefficiencies in professional services firms is exactly the kind of strategic thinking Phoenix Dynamics values. We've been looking for someone with her specific combination of analytical skills and industry insight. The crowd around us had grown, drawn by the magnetic pull of watching someone's world get turned upside down in real time. I could see David Chen looking back and forth between Victoria and me as if he were watching a tennis match. Marcus Rodriguez had a slight smile on his face that suggested he was enjoying this reversal more than professional politeness would normally allow. "But she's been struggling to find work," Victoria said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "She can barely support herself with freelance projects." Elena Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. Sometimes the most valuable talent is overlooked precisely because it doesn't fit conventional expectations. The consulting industry can be remarkably narrow in its definition of success. The subtext was clear to everyone present. Victoria's public dismissal of my capabilities had just been contradicted by one of Seattle's most respected business leaders. The sister she had portrayed as a professional failure was apparently talented enough to catch the attention of Phoenix Dynamics. "In fact," Elena Blackwood continued, "we've been so impressed with Amanda's work that we'd like to offer her a position with Phoenix Dynamics, senior level, with immediate effect." The words hit like physical blows. Senior level, Phoenix Dynamics, immediate effect. I found myself struggling to breathe normally as the implications cascaded through my mind. This wasn't just validation of my professional capabilities. This was a complete inversion of the narrative Victoria had been constructing about my life. "What kind of position?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier now. "Chief Strategy Officer," Elena Blackwood replied casually, as if she were offering me a cup of coffee rather than a career-defining opportunity. "We need someone who can identify growth opportunities and operational improvements across our portfolio companies. Based on your published analysis, you're exactly the kind of strategic thinker we've been searching for. Chief Strategy Officer at Phoenix Dynamics." The title alone would transform my professional standing overnight. I would go from struggling freelancer to senior executive at one of the region's most influential companies. The salary alone would probably triple my current income, but more importantly, it would validate every risk I had taken, every unconventional choice that had led to this moment. Victoria's face had gone completely white. She looked like someone who had just watched their carefully constructed worldview collapse in real time. "This is so sudden," she said weakly. "Amanda hasn't even had time to consider." "Actually," I interrupted, finding my voice and my courage simultaneously, "I don't need time to consider. I accept." The words came out stronger and clearer than anything I had said all evening. Elena Blackwood smiled, and this time it was genuine, warm, and welcoming. "Excellent," she said. "Can you start Monday? We have a board meeting where I'd like to introduce our new Chief Strategy Officer to the team." "I'll be there," I said, and meant it completely. As Elena Blackwood excused herself to mingle with other guests, I found myself standing in the center of a circle of Victoria's colleagues who were looking at me with entirely different eyes than they had been just minutes before. The woman they had dismissed as a failure was now the Chief Strategy Officer of Phoenix Dynamics. The sister Victoria had used as a cautionary tale had just landed one of the most coveted positions in Seattle's business community. Victoria stood, frozen, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, watching her carefully orchestrated narrative crumble around her. The sister she had publicly humiliated had just been offered a position that far exceeded her own professional achievements. The family disappointment had become the family success story in the span of a single conversation. Marcus Rodriguez was the first to break the stunned silence. "Congratulations, Amanda," he said sincerely. "That's incredible news." Others echoed the sentiment, their voices carrying a mixture of genuine surprise and professional calculation. These were people who understood the significance of what had just happened, who recognized that the woman they had dismissed minutes earlier was now someone they might need to know professionally. I looked at Victoria, seeing my sister clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The golden child who had built her identity around being superior to me was struggling to process a reality where I might actually be the more successful sister. The engagement party that was supposed to celebrate her perfect life had become the stage for my professional breakthrough. "Victoria," I said quietly, my voice carrying just far enough for our immediate circle to hear. "Thank you for inviting me tonight. This has been absolutely transformative." The word choice was deliberate, a gentle callback to her earlier comments about my need to accept reality. Reality, as it turned out, was far more complex than she had assumed. As I walked away from the group, heading toward the bar to process what had just happened, I could hear the murmur of conversation resuming behind me, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. Victoria's engagement party would be remembered not just as the celebration of her upcoming marriage, but as the night her supposedly worthless sister was revealed to be anything but. The morning after Victoria's engagement party, I sat in my cramped Capitol Hill apartment staring at Elena Blackwood's business card, wondering if the entire evening had been an elaborate dream. The card was real enough. Heavy stock paper with embossed lettering and the Phoenix Dynamics logo gleaming silver in the weak Seattle sunlight filtering through my single window. But the conversation still felt surreal, too good to be true in the way that life-changing moments often do. My phone had been buzzing since 7 a.m. with messages from family members who had apparently heard about last night's events through Victoria's increasingly frantic calls. Mom's voicemail was a masterpiece of confused concern, alternating between pride that I had landed such an impressive job and worry that I might have somehow embarrassed Victoria in the process. Dad's text was characteristically brief. "Heard the news. Call when you can." But it was the radio silence from Victoria herself that spoke loudest of all. I made coffee in my ancient coffee maker, the one appliance in my kitchen that consistently worked, and tried to piece together how I had arrived at this moment. The freelance consulting work that Victoria had dismissed so casually hadn't been chosen out of lack of ambition. It had been a calculated decision, born from a series of rejections and setbacks that had gradually eroded my confidence in traditional career paths. 3 years ago, I had been on a completely different trajectory. Fresh out of my MBA program at the University of Washington, I had interviews lined up with several prestigious consulting firms, including McKinsey and Bain. My grades were excellent. My professors had written glowing recommendations, and I felt certain that the business world was ready to embrace my ideas about operational efficiency and strategic planning. The first rejection had been from Deloitte. "We were impressed with your academic credentials," the hiring manager had said over the phone, "but we decided to go with candidates who have more practical experience." The feedback stung, but I understood the logic. Fresh MBAs were competing against candidates with years of industry experience. The second rejection came from BCG. "Your analytical skills are strong," they said, "but we're looking for someone who fits more naturally into our company culture." Company culture. The phrase that every job seeker learns to dread because it can mean anything from "you don't have the right pedigree" to "we're not sure you'll mesh with the team" to something even more problematic that they can't legally say out loud. By the fourth rejection, a pattern was emerging that I was too naive to recognize at the time. Each firm praised my technical skills and academic achievements, but found reasons to pass that felt increasingly arbitrary. My interview style was too analytical. My presentation approach was not dynamic enough. My background was impressive, but not quite what we're looking for right now. It was Sophie Turner, my best friend from graduate school, who finally connected the dots for me. We were having coffee at Emerald Coffee House 6 months into my job search, and I was recounting my latest rejection from a mid-tier consulting firm that I had thought would be happy to have someone with my qualifications. "Amanda," Sophie said, gently, stirring her latte with the kind of deliberate care that meant she was choosing her words carefully. "Have you considered that some of these rejections might not be about your qualifications?" I looked at her blankly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that consulting is still very much an old boys' network, and you're not exactly what they picture when they think of their ideal candidate." The suggestion that gender might be playing a role in my job search felt both obvious and impossible to prove. None of the rejections had been explicitly discriminatory. The feedback was always professional, always focused on supposedly objective criteria. But Sophie's observation forced me to examine my experiences through a different lens. The male candidates from my MBA program had landed positions at roughly twice the rate of the female candidates. The women who did get hired tended to fit a particular mold, confident to the point of aggressive, willing to adopt a more masculine communication style, or connected to the industry through family relationships. I was none of those things. My approach to business was collaborative rather than competitive. I believed in building consensus and finding solutions that worked for everyone involved, rather than treating every interaction as a zero-sum game. My presentation style was thoughtful and detail-oriented rather than flashy and high energy. These weren't weaknesses, but they apparently weren't what the consulting world was looking for in 2021. The freelance path had emerged as a necessity rather than a choice. If established consulting firms wouldn't hire me, I would create my own opportunities. I would work with smaller companies that needed strategic guidance but couldn't afford the big-name firms. I would prove my value through results rather than credentials. For the first year, the strategy had seemed promising. I landed several small projects with local businesses, helping them streamline their operations and improve their market positioning. My clients were consistently satisfied with my work, and several provided referrals that led to additional opportunities. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building a reputation and developing a portfolio of successful projects. The problem was scale. Small businesses had limited budgets for consulting services, and they tended to need help with specific short-term challenges rather than ongoing strategic guidance. I was constantly starting over with new clients, having to prove my competence from scratch each time. The feast or famine cycle of freelance work meant that even my most successful months were followed by stretches of uncertainty and financial stress. Victoria's success during this same period had created an increasingly uncomfortable contrast. While I was struggling to build a sustainable consulting practice one small client at a time, she was climbing the ladder at Sterling & Associates with impressive speed. Her promotion to senior account manager had come with a salary that exceeded what I made in my best year of freelancing. Her engagement to David Chen represented another form of success, the kind of personal milestone that seemed to validate her entire approach to life. Our parents had tried to be supportive of both of us, but their efforts often felt like a comparison that I was consistently losing. Victoria got another promotion, Mom would mention during our weekly phone calls, followed immediately by, "How's your consulting work going, dear?" The juxtaposition was never explicitly critical, but the subtext was clear. Victoria was succeeding by conventional measures, while I was pursuing something that looked increasingly like an extended period of professional drift. The worst part was that I had started to internalize their doubts. Maybe Victoria was right about my lack of realistic expectations. Maybe my approach to business was too idealistic for a competitive market. Maybe the established consulting firms had been correct in their assessment that I wasn't quite what they were looking for. Those doubts had led me to make increasingly conservative choices. I stopped applying for positions at larger firms, convincing myself that I preferred the independence of freelance work. I stopped networking aggressively, telling myself that I wanted my work to speak for itself, rather than relying on connections and schmoozing. I gradually lowered my rates to compete for smaller projects, reasoning that steady income was more important than holding out for premium assignments. Each compromise had been rational in isolation, but the cumulative effect had been to gradually diminish my professional ambitions and market value. By the time Victoria made her cruel comments at the engagement party, I had almost convinced myself that she was right about my fundamental lack of competitiveness. The irony was that I had been producing some of my best work during this period of supposed failure. The market analysis that had impressed Elena Blackwood had grown out of my frustration with the inefficiencies I observed in the consulting industry. Small firms like mine were often better positioned to provide personalized service and innovative solutions, but we lacked the brand recognition and marketing resources to compete effectively with established players. My analysis had identified specific technological and strategic approaches that could level the playing field, allowing smaller consultancies to leverage their advantages while overcoming their resource limitations. It was the kind of systemic thinking that came naturally to me, but had apparently been invisible to the industry I was trying to break into. I had published the analysis on my professional blog without any expectation that it would reach a significant audience. It was more of a therapeutic exercise, a way of working through my frustrations by articulating solutions to the problems I was experiencing. The fact that Elena Blackwood had not only read it but been impressed enough to seek me out suggested that my perspective had value I hadn't recognized. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Sophie's name appeared on the screen, and I answered, with relief. I needed to talk to someone who understood the context of what had happened last night. Amanda Hayes, Chief Strategy Officer, Sophie said without preamble. I cannot believe you didn't call me immediately. It still doesn't feel real, I admitted. I keep expecting Elena Blackwood to call and say there was some kind of misunderstanding. Are you insane? This is the opportunity you've been working toward for 3 years. Phoenix Dynamics is exactly the kind of company where your skills would be valued. Sophie's enthusiasm was infectious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Why now, though? Why did Elena Blackwood suddenly decide to track me down at Victoria's engagement party? It feels too convenient. Maybe it's not convenient, Sophie suggested. Maybe it's just good timing. You've been building your reputation, quietly for years, and now someone with real influence has finally noticed. I wanted to believe that explanation, but my experience with disappointment had made me cautious about optimism. What if I'm not ready for this level of responsibility? Chief Strategy Officer at Phoenix Dynamics isn't exactly a step up from small freelance projects. It's more like a leap into a completely different league. Amanda, Sophie said, her voice taking on the firm tone she used when she thought I was being unnecessarily self-deprecating. You've been ready for this kind of role since graduate school. The only reason you haven't been in it already is because the industry has been too stupid to recognize your potential. Her confidence in my abilities felt both comforting and terrifying. What if she was wrong? What if Elena Blackwood had overestimated my qualifications based on a single piece of analysis? What if I accepted the position only to fail spectacularly in front of Seattle's business community? I need to understand more about what happened last night, I said. How did Elena Blackwood know about my work? How did she know I would be at Victoria's engagement party? There are too many coincidences for this to be random. Maybe you should ask her directly, Sophie suggested. You're starting Monday, right? You'll have plenty of opportunities to understand how you got here. After hanging up with Sophie, I spent the rest of the morning researching Phoenix Dynamics more thoroughly than I had been able to do in the chaos of the previous evening. The company had been founded 15 years ago by Elena Blackwood and 2 partners who had since left to pursue other ventures. Their focus was on identifying undervalued or mismanaged companies and providing the strategic guidance needed to unlock their potential. Phoenix Dynamics' portfolio included everything from small tech startups to established manufacturing companies that needed operational overhauls. Their approach seemed to emphasize sustainable growth rather than quick profits, and their track record of successful turnarounds was genuinely impressive. Working there would provide exposure to a variety of industries and business challenges that could advance my expertise exponentially. More importantly, Phoenix Dynamics' corporate culture appeared to value exactly the kind of collaborative, analytical approach that I had been told was wrong for consulting. Their case studies emphasized building consensus among stakeholders, identifying win-win solutions, and taking a long-term view of business success. It was as if someone had designed a consulting firm specifically for people who thought like I did. The research was reassuring, but it also raised new questions about how I had caught Elena Blackwood's attention. Phoenix Dynamics was selective about the strategic consultants they hired, typically recruiting from top-tier firms or prestigious academic institutions. I didn't fit their usual profile any more than I had fit the profiles of the companies that had rejected me 3 years ago. My laptop chimed with a new email, and I felt my heart rate spike when I saw Elena Blackwood's name in my inbox. The subject line was simple: "Welcome to Phoenix Dynamics." "Amanda," the email began, "I wanted to follow up on our conversation last night and provide some additional details about your new role. I've attached a formal offer letter with salary and benefit information, as well as some background materials about our current strategic initiatives. I should mention that I've been following your work for longer than I indicated at the party. Your analysis of consulting industry inefficiencies was brought to my attention by Marcus Rodriguez, who has been advocating for Phoenix Dynamics to take a different approach to identifying talent. When he mentioned that you would be attending your sister's engagement party, I saw an opportunity to meet you in person and assess whether our initial impression of your capabilities was accurate. Based on our conversation, I'm confident that you'll bring exactly the kind of strategic thinking Phoenix Dynamics needs as we expand our portfolio of client companies. I look forward to working with you. Best regards, Elena Blackwood." Read the email 3 times, processing the implications of each sentence. Marcus Rodriguez had been advocating for me. Elena Blackwood had been following my work for some time. My attendance at Victoria's engagement party hadn't been a coincidence from Elena's perspective. It had been a planned opportunity to evaluate me as a potential hire. The revelation recontextualized everything that had happened the previous evening. Elena Blackwood hadn't stumbled upon my work and decided to offer me a job on impulse. She had come to the party specifically to meet me, armed with knowledge of my professional capabilities and a job offer already in mind. Victoria's cruel comments had simply provided the perfect dramatic timing for the revelation. I opened the attached offer letter with trembling hands, and the salary figure made me sit down heavily in my desk chair. The base compensation was more than double my best year of freelance income, with performance bonuses that could potentially triple that amount. The benefits package included health insurance, retirement contributions, and professional development, opportunities that would have been impossible to access as an independent consultant. But beyond the financial transformation, the position represented something even more valuable: validation that my approach to business strategy was not only viable, but sought after by companies at the highest level of success. Elena Blackwood wasn't offering me charity or taking a chance on an unproven consultant. She was investing in capabilities that she believed would contribute to Phoenix Dynamics' continued growth. The phone rang again, and this time Victoria's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for several rings, not sure I was ready for the conversation that was inevitably coming. Finally, I answered. "Amanda." Victoria's voice was strained, lacking the confident authority that usually characterized her communication style. "We need to talk." "Hello, Victoria. Congratulations again on your engagement." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she probably intended. "Don't pretend last night didn't happen." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. Victoria had initiated this conversation. She could determine its direction. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About Phoenix Dynamics, about Elena Blackwood reading your work. I had no idea you were being considered for anything like that. Would it have mattered if you had known?" Another pause, longer this time. "Maybe. I don't know." Things have been complicated between us for a long time. Complicated. It was such a Victoria word. Clinical and distant, avoiding the emotional reality of what had actually been happening between us. Our relationship hadn't been complicated. It had been systematically undermining on her part and increasingly resigned on mine. Victoria, I need to understand something. Last night wasn't the first time you've talked about my professional failures. In public, was it? What do you mean? I mean that your colleagues seemed very familiar with your assessment of my career, like they'd heard this analysis before. The silence that followed was answer enough. Victoria had been using my struggles as a regular talking point, a way of highlighting her own success by contrast. The public humiliation at her engagement party had been particularly cruel, but it wasn't an isolated incident. Amanda, you have to understand my position. People at Sterling and Associates are very competitive, very focused on success. When they ask about family, when they want to know about my background, I have to present myself in a certain way. And that way requires presenting me as a failure? It requires being realistic about our different career trajectories. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Even now, even after Elena Blackwood's job offer had completely inverted our supposed career trajectories, Victoria couldn't acknowledge that her assessment of my professional capabilities might have been wrong. Our different career trajectories, I repeated slowly. Is that what you're calling it? Amanda, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Yes, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Yes, I was surprised by what happened last night. But one job offer doesn't erase 3 years of struggles. The conversation was revealing more about Victoria than I think she realized. Even faced with evidence that contradicted her narrative about my professional inadequacy, she was doubling down on her original assessment. The problem wasn't that she had been wrong about my capabilities. The problem was that I was making things difficult by not accepting her judgment gracefully. Victoria, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like an honest answer. Have you ever actively undermined my professional opportunities? What are you talking about? I'm talking about Seattle's business community being smaller than people realize. I'm talking about the possibility that some of my freelance client rejections might have been influenced by conversations you had with people in your network. That's paranoid, Amanda. I would never do something like that. But her denial came too quickly, with too much emphasis. People who are telling the truth don't usually need to protest their innocence so vigorously. I'm sure you wouldn't do it deliberately, I said, choosing my words carefully. But if someone asked you about my reliability or competence, what would you have told them? This time the silence was profound and telling. Victoria had built her professional identity partly on being the successful sister, the one who had made smart choices and achieved conventional markers of success. Maintaining that identity required me to remain in the role of the struggling sister, the cautionary tale that highlighted her superior judgment. I have to go, Victoria said finally. David and I have wedding planning appointments all day. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the detritus of my freelance career, stacks of client proposals, business plan drafts, and market analysis reports that represented 3 years of work that Victoria had dismissed as professional failure. Tomorrow, I would walk into Phoenix Dynamics as Chief Strategy Officer, carrying the same skills and perspective that had been overlooked, or actively undermined by the very people who should have recognized their value. The transformation wasn't just professional. It was personal, psychological, fundamental to how I understood my own capabilities and worth. Victoria's engagement party had been intended to celebrate her perfect life and highlight my comparative failures. Instead, it had become the stage for revealing that success and failure aren't always what they appear to be, and that the most valuable opportunities often come from the most unexpected sources. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Seattle weather that makes everything feel possible. I stood outside the glass tower that housed Phoenix Dynamics, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that Sophie had insisted I buy for the occasion. The building stretched 43 floors into the cloudy sky, its modern architecture reflecting the ambitious energy of the Westfield business district. My reflection in the revolving doors showed a woman I was still getting used to seeing. Gone was the apologetic posture I had developed over 3 years of defending my career choices to skeptical family members and potential clients. In its place stood someone who belonged in this environment, someone whose expertise was valued and sought after by one of Seattle's most successful companies. The lobby was all marble and steel, with a dramatic water feature that somehow managed to be both impressive and soothing. The Phoenix Dynamics logo dominated one wall, etched in brushed aluminum letters that caught the morning light. I approached the reception desk with steady steps, no longer the uncertain freelancer who had learned to expect rejection. "Amanda Hayes," I told the receptionist, a young man with perfectly styled hair who looked like he could have stepped out of a corporate recruiting brochure. "I'm here to see Elena Blackwood." "Ms. Hayes," he said with genuine warmth, "welcome to Phoenix Dynamics. Ms. Blackwood is expecting you. I'll escort you to the executive floor." The elevator ride to the 38th floor was smooth and silent, giving me time to center myself for what would undoubtedly be an intense first day. When the doors opened, I stepped into a reception area that managed to combine luxury with functionality in a way that spoke to serious business rather than mere status display. Elena Blackwood emerged from a corner office before I could announce myself to her assistant. She was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but her smile was warm and welcoming as she approached. "Amanda, perfect timing," she said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "I hope you're ready to jump in immediately. We have a client presentation this afternoon that could benefit from your strategic perspective." The immediate inclusion in high-level client work sent a surge of adrenaline through me. This was exactly the kind of meaningful engagement I had been craving throughout my freelance career. No gradual introduction period, no months of proving myself with minor projects. Elena Blackwood was treating me like the senior executive I was supposed to be. "I'm ready," I replied, and meant it completely. Elena led me through a tour of the office space that revealed the careful thought behind Phoenix Dynamics' approach to business. The open areas encouraged collaboration, while private offices provided space for concentrated work. Conference rooms were equipped with the latest technology for client presentations and remote meetings. Everything was designed to facilitate the kind of strategic thinking that drove successful consulting outcomes. "Your office," Elena said, opening the door to a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. The view was spectacular, but more importantly, the IT office was clearly designed for someone who would be handling significant responsibilities. The desk was large enough for spreading out complex documents, the seating area was configured for small meetings, and the technology setup would support everything from financial modeling to client video conferences. "This is incredible," I said, running my hand along the polished surface of the desk. "I have to admit, it's a significant upgrade from my kitchen table." Elena laughed, but not in the dismissive way Victoria always did when I mentioned my modest freelance setup. "We've all been there. When I started Phoenix Dynamics, I worked out of a shared office space in Pioneer Square. The important thing is recognizing when it's time to scale up your ambitions to match your capabilities." The observation struck me as profoundly accurate. For 3 years, I had been scaling down my ambitions to match my circumstances rather than scaling up my circumstances to match my potential. The kitchen table setup hadn't been a charming entrepreneurial phase. It had been a reflection of my gradually diminishing expectations for my own career. "Let me introduce you to the team you'll be working with most closely," Elena continued. leading me toward a conference room where several people were already gathered around laptops and coffee cups. The introductions were swift and professional. Sarah Kim, the Director of Client Relations, who would coordinate my involvement in active consulting engagements. Robert Chen, the Chief Financial Officer, who would work with me on the financial analysis components of strategic recommendations. Maria Santos, the Director of Business Development, who would help identify opportunities where my expertise could win new clients. Each person I met seemed genuinely pleased to have me joining the team. But more importantly, they spoke to me as an equal rather than a new hire who needed to prove herself. They asked substantive questions about my approach to market analysis and operational efficiency, engaging with my ideas as valuable contributions rather than academic theories that needed to be tested in the real world. Amanda's first project will be the Cascade Industries engagement, Elena announced as we settled around the conference table. They're a mid-sized manufacturing company that's been struggling with supply chain inefficiencies and declining market share. Traditional consulting approaches haven't been successful, which is exactly why we think Amanda's perspective could make the difference. Sarah Kim pulled up a presentation on the large monitor at the front of the room. Cascade Industries has been a client for 6 months, she explained. We've helped them identify several operational improvements, but they're still not seeing the kind of transformational results they need to remain competitive. As Sarah walked through the client's background and current challenges, I found myself analyzing the information through the lens of everything I had learned during my freelance years. Working with smaller companies had taught me to look for systemic issues that larger consulting firms often missed because they were focused on implementing standardized solutions rather than understanding unique circumstances. What's their relationship with suppliers like? I asked when Sarah finished her overview. Adversarial, Robert answered immediately. They've been focused on driving down costs through aggressive negotiation, but supplier relationships have deteriorated significantly, and employee retention in key operational roles. High turnover, Maria replied, particularly in middle management positions that are crucial for day-to-day coordination. I could already see the outline of a strategic approach that would address both issues simultaneously, but I wanted to understand more about what previous consultants had recommended before proposing alternatives. What solutions have been attempted so far? Standard efficiency optimization, Elena said with a slight grimace. Process re-engineering, technology upgrades, organizational restructuring. All technically sound recommendations, but they've treated symptoms rather than addressing the underlying cultural and strategic issues. This was exactly the kind of situation where my collaborative approach could provide value that traditional consulting methods missed. The problems at Cascade Industries weren't just operational, they were relational and cultural. Fixing them would require rebuilding trust both internally with employees and externally with suppliers. I'd like to propose a different framework, I said, moving to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Instead of focusing primarily on cost reduction and efficiency metrics, what if we approach this as an ecosystem optimization challenge? I began sketching out a diagram that showed Cascade Industries at the center of a network of relationships, rather than as an isolated entity trying to maximize its individual performance. If we can help them rebuild supplier relationships based on mutual benefit rather than zero-sum negotiation, and if we can create internal culture changes that reduce turnover and improve coordination, the operational efficiencies will follow, naturally. The room was quiet as everyone studied the framework I had outlined. I could feel my heart beating faster as I waited for their response. This was the moment when I would learn whether Phoenix Dynamics truly valued innovative thinking, or whether Elena Blackwood's enthusiasm for my approach had been overstated. That's brilliant, Sarah said finally. It addresses the human factors that traditional efficiency consulting typically ignores. And it's sustainable, Robert added. Cost-cutting measures eventually hit diminishing returns, but relationship improvements can compound over time. Elena was nodding thoughtfully as she studied my diagram. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that sets Phoenix Dynamics apart from our competitors. Amanda, I want you to lead the Cascade Industries engagement. Full authority to implement whatever approach you think will be most effective. The trust she was placing in me was both exhilarating and terrifying. Leading a major client engagement on my first day was unprecedented, but Elena was treating it as natural recognition of my capabilities rather than an extraordinary leap of faith. "When do I meet with the client?" I asked. "This afternoon," Elena replied. "The CEO and senior management team are coming here for a progress review. They're expecting to hear about incremental improvements, but instead, you'll be presenting a completely new strategic direction." The timeline was aggressive, but I had spent 3 years developing the ability to think quickly and adapt to changing circumstances. Freelance consulting had taught me to synthesize complex information rapidly and present compelling recommendations under pressure. "I'll be ready," I said, already mentally organizing the presentation I would need to prepare. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of intensive preparation. I reviewed every document Phoenix Dynamics had collected about Cascade Industries, studied their financial statements and operational reports, and researched their competitive landscape and supplier networks. The picture that emerged confirmed my initial assessment that previous consulting efforts had focused on the wrong priorities. Cascade Industries had been profitable for decades by maintaining strong relationships with both customers and suppliers. Their recent struggles weren't the result of operational incompetence, but of strategic decisions that had prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term sustainability. The adversarial supplier relationships and high employee turnover were symptoms of a cultural shift away from the collaborative approach that had originally made them successful. My presentation would need to convince their management team that returning to their relationship-focused roots, enhanced by modern operational tools and techniques, would be more effective than continuing to pursue aggressive cost-cutting measures. At 2 o'clock, I stood in Phoenix Dynamics' main conference room facing 5 executives from Cascade Industries. Their CEO, David Martinez, was a man in his 50s who carried himself with the weary authority of someone who had been fighting an uphill battle for too long. His CFO, operations director, and other senior staff looked equally frustrated and skeptical about consulting recommendations in general. "Before we begin," Elena said as she introduced me, "I want you to meet Amanda Hayes, our new Chief Strategy Officer. Amanda has identified some strategic opportunities that we believe could transform Cascade Industries' competitive position." The introduction was both supportive and pressure-filled. These executives had been disappointed by previous consulting efforts, and they were clearly prepared to be disappointed again. My presentation would need to be compelling enough to overcome their skepticism while demonstrating real understanding of their unique challenges. "Mr. Martinez," I began, looking directly at the CEO. "I've reviewed 6 months of operational data and consulting reports, and I think we've been asking the wrong questions about Cascade Industries' challenges." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he gestured for me to continue. "The focus has been on how to make your current operational model more efficient, but the real question is whether your current operational model is the right one for your competitive environment." I clicked to my first slide, which showed Cascade Industries' profitability over the past decade. "Your most successful years corresponded with periods when you maintained strong supplier relationships and low employee turnover. The decline in performance correlates directly with the adoption of more adversarial negotiation tactics and cost-cutting measures that damaged those relationships." David Martinez leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from skeptical to genuinely interested. "Are you suggesting that our efficiency improvements have been counterproductive?" "I'm suggesting that efficiency improvements without relationship maintenance create unsustainable competitive advantages," I replied. "Your suppliers have less incentive to prioritize your orders, provide quality materials, or offer flexible terms. Your employees have less incentive to go above and beyond in their roles or stay with the company long term. The short-term cost savings are offset by longer-term relationship costs. The operations director, a woman named Jennifer Wu, spoke up. But our margins were being squeezed by competition. We had to find ways to reduce costs. Absolutely, I agreed. But there are ways to reduce costs that strengthen relationships rather than damaging them. What if we could help your suppliers become more efficient so they could offer better pricing without sacrificing their own margins? What if we could create employee incentive structures that aligned individual success with company performance? I walked them through a detailed framework for rebuilding supplier relationships based on collaborative efficiency improvements rather than adversarial price negotiations. Instead of demanding lower costs, we would offer technical assistance and process improvements that would benefit both Cascade Industries and their suppliers. Instead of treating employees as cost centers to be minimized, we would invest in training and development programs that would reduce turnover while improving performance. This approach requires more upfront investment, I acknowledged. But the long-term competitive advantages are sustainable in ways that pure cost-cutting never can be. The room was quiet as the Cascade Industries team absorbed the implications of what I was proposing. Finally, David Martinez spoke. Ms. Hayes, this is the first consulting recommendation we've received that actually addresses the underlying issues we've been struggling with rather than just optimizing around them. How quickly could we implement this approach? Jennifer? Wu asked. The relationship rebuilding can begin immediately, I replied. I'd recommend starting with your 3 most important suppliers and your highest performing employee divisions. Success in those areas will create momentum for broader implementation. Elena stepped forward. Amanda will be personally overseeing the Cascade Industries engagement. Phoenix Dynamics is committed to making this transformation successful. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and scheduling discussions for follow-up sessions, I felt a profound sense of professional fulfillment that had been missing from my freelance work. This was strategic consulting at the level I had always imagined, with the resources and authority to implement meaningful changes, rather than just providing reports that might or might not be acted upon. Outstanding work, Elena said as the Cascade Industries team departed. That presentation was exactly what I hoped to see when I hired you. The validation from someone whose opinion I respected deeply was almost overwhelming. For 3 years, I had questioned whether my approach to business strategy was valuable or whether Victoria's assessment of my impracticality might be accurate. Elena's confidence in my methods provided the external confirmation I had needed to fully trust my own judgment. There's something else we need to discuss, Elena continued as we walked back toward her office. The success of your first day has already generated interest from other potential clients. Word travels fast in Seattle's business community, and several companies have reached out about strategic consulting services. The idea that my reputation was already spreading felt surreal. This morning, I had been an unknown freelancer struggling to build a sustainable practice. Now, I was potentially becoming known as the strategic consultant who could solve problems that stumped traditional approaches. What kind of companies? I asked. Mid-sized firms facing similar challenges to Cascade Industries. Companies that have been successful using relationship-based approaches, but are struggling to adapt to more competitive markets without losing their core advantages. It was exactly the kind of strategic niche I had been hoping to develop throughout my freelance career. Companies that needed sophisticated business analysis, but also valued collaborative approaches and sustainable competitive advantages. I had found my professional home not despite my unconventional methods, but because of them. As I settled into my new office to begin preparing for the Cascade Industries implementation, my phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. Heard you started at Phoenix Dynamics today. Hope it goes well. The message was polite but distant, lacking any acknowledgement of how dramatically wrong her assessment of my professional capabilities had been. Even now, she was treating my success as a temporary anomaly, rather than evidence that her understanding of my talents had been fundamentally flawed. I deleted the message without responding and turned my attention to the strategic planning documents spread across my new desk. Victoria's inability to recognize my professional value was no longer my problem to solve. I had found colleagues who understood what I brought to their organization, clients who valued my approach to their challenges, and work that utilized my capabilities fully, rather than requiring me to diminish them. The transformation was complete in ways that went far beyond a job title or salary increase. I had reclaimed not just my professional identity, but my confidence in my own judgment and worth. The sister who had been dismissed as worthless at an engagement party had become the strategic consultant that Seattle's business community was talking about. It was exactly the kind of reversal that would have seemed impossible just days earlier, but which now felt like the natural result of finally being in an environment where my talents were recognized and valued. 3 weeks into my tenure at Phoenix Dynamics, I received an email that would change everything between Victoria and me forever. The sender was James Mitchell, managing partner at Sterling & Associates, Victoria's firm. The subject line was deceptively simple. Strategic. Partnership opportunity. Ms. Hayes, the email began, Phoenix Dynamics' reputation for innovative business solutions has come to our attention, particularly your work with Cascade Industries. Sterling & Associates is experiencing some operational challenges that we believe would benefit from your strategic expertise. Would you be available for a consultation meeting this week? I stared at the email for several minutes, processing its implications. Sterling & Associates wasn't just any potential client, it was Victoria's workplace, the professional environment where she had built her identity as the successful sister. The company where she had spent years climbing the corporate ladder while dismissing my career as worthless freelance work. The irony was breathtaking. The firm where Victoria was a senior account manager was now seeking help from the sister. She had publicly humiliated just 3 weeks earlier. They needed the strategic expertise of the woman she had called a professional failure in front of their own employees. I forwarded the email to Elena with a brief note explaining the personal context. Her response came within minutes. This is exactly the kind of high-profile engagement that will establish Phoenix Dynamics as Seattle's premier strategic consulting firm. Accept the meeting. We'll make this Sterling & Associates' most transformative consulting experience. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in Sterling & Associates' downtown conference room. I spent the intervening days researching everything I could find about their business operations, client base, and competitive challenges. What I discovered was a marketing agency struggling with the same relationship issues that had plagued Cascade Industries, but with additional complications stemming from rapid growth and inadequate operational infrastructure. Sterling & Associates had built their reputation on landing high-profile clients through aggressive business development tactics. Their growth had been impressive by traditional metrics, but their client retention rates were declining, and employee satisfaction surveys revealed significant internal tension. They were experiencing the classic symptoms of a company that prioritized acquisition over sustainability. Thursday arrived with the kind of gray Seattle weather that makes everyone look serious and focused. I dressed in my sharpest business attire, carrying a leather briefcase that contained a comprehensive analysis of Sterling & Associates' strategic challenges, along with preliminary recommendations for addressing them. The Sterling & Associates office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise in the financial district. Their reception area was designed to impress potential clients with displays of awards, testimonials, and photographs of their team working with recognizable corporate brands. Everything about the space communicated success, competence, and professional authority. Ms. Hayes, the receptionist said with professional warmth, Mr. Mitchell is expecting you in conference room A. As I walked through the office toward the conference room, I caught glimpses of the Sterling & Associates team at work. Open cubicles filled with account managers handling client calls, creative teams collaborating on campaign concepts, and senior staff moving between meetings with the kind of purposeful energy that characterized successful professional environments. I didn't see Victoria during my walk through the office, but I could feel the psychological weight of being in her professional territory. This was the place where she had built her career, where her colleagues knew her as the competent senior account manager with the disappointing freelancer sister. Now that disappointing sister was walking through their office as a strategic consultant they had specifically requested. Conference Room A was an impressive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay and a polished table that could seat 20 people. James Mitchell was already there when I arrived, along with 3 other senior staff members whose titles suggested they were responsible for operations, client relations, and business development. "Ms. Hayes," James Mitchell said, rising to shake my hand. He was a man in his early 50s with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested he understood the importance of professional image. "Thank you for making time to meet with us. Your work with Cascade Industries has generated considerable attention in Seattle's business community." The compliment was professionally delivered, but I could see curiosity in his expression. He was clearly wondering how the sister of one of his account managers had suddenly emerged as a strategic consultant worthy of his attention. "I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about Sterling and Associates' challenges," I replied, settling into my chair and opening my briefcase. "From my preliminary research, it appears you're experiencing some growing pains that are affecting both client satisfaction and internal operations." "That's an accurate assessment," admitted Rachel Torres, the Director of Client Relations. "Our revenue growth has been strong, but we're struggling to maintain the quality of service that built our reputation." I pulled out copies of my analysis and distributed them around the table. "I've identified 3 interconnected issues that I believe are driving most of your operational challenges. First, your business development approach is generating clients whose expectations don't align with your service delivery capabilities. Second, your internal workflow processes haven't scaled effectively with your growth. And third, your employee retention challenges are creating institutional knowledge gaps that compound both other problems." The room was quiet as they reviewed my documentation. I had spent considerable time ensuring that my analysis was thorough and professionally presented, but I was also aware that this meeting had implications beyond typical consulting engagement. If my recommendations proved valuable, Sterling and Associates would have to acknowledge that Victoria's assessment of my professional capabilities had been completely wrong. "These observations are remarkably perceptive," said Michael Chen, the operations director. "We've been treating these as separate problems, but you're right that they're systematically related." "What solutions would you recommend?" James Mitchell asked, leaning forward with obvious interest. I clicked to my presentation slides, which outlined a comprehensive strategy for addressing Sterling and Associates' challenges through coordinated changes to their business development, operations, and human resources approaches. "The key is alignment," I explained. "Your business development team needs tools for identifying clients whose needs match your actual service capabilities, rather than just focusing on contract value. Your operations team needs workflow systems that can handle variable project demands without creating bottlenecks, and your HR approach needs to emphasize retention and development rather than just recruitment." As I walked through each component of my strategic framework, I could see the Sterling and Associates team becoming increasingly engaged with the ideas I was presenting. These weren't abstract theoretical concepts, but practical solutions to problems they faced every day. "This is exactly what we need," Rachel Torres said when I finished my presentation. "How quickly could you implement these changes?" "The timeline depends on how thoroughly you want to transform your operations," I replied. "Surface-level improvements could be implemented within 30 days, but sustainable transformation would require a 3-month engagement with ongoing monitoring and adjustment." James Mitchell exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. "Ms. Hayes, we'd like to engage Phoenix Dynamics for the comprehensive transformation approach, whatever timeline and resource requirements you recommend." The decision represented a significant victory for both Phoenix Dynamics and my own professional reputation. Sterling and Associates was exactly the kind of high-profile client that would establish me as one of Seattle's most sought-after strategic consultants. "I'll prepare a detailed proposal and implementation timeline," I said. "You can expect it by Monday morning." As the meeting concluded with handshakes and expressions of enthusiasm for working together, James Mitchell held back as the others departed. "Ms. Hayes, I have to mention something that makes this situation particularly interesting," he said with a slight smile. "One of our senior account managers is Victoria Hayes. I believe she's your sister." The moment had arrived. I had been wondering throughout the meeting whether Victoria's relationship to me would be acknowledged, and if so, how that acknowledgement would be framed. "Yes, Victoria is my sister," I confirmed calmly. "She's spoken about you occasionally," James continued, his tone carefully neutral. "Though I have to admit, her descriptions didn't quite prepare us for the level of strategic expertise you've demonstrated today." The diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the underlying message. Victoria's characterization of my professional capabilities had been so inaccurate that her boss was now diplomatically noting the discrepancy. "Family dynamics can be complicated," I replied, offering him an opportunity to gracefully conclude this line of conversation. "Indeed they can," he agreed. "I hope our professional relationship won't create any personal complications for you." "I don't anticipate any issues," I said, though I suspected that was probably optimistic. As I left Sterling and Associates and walked toward the parking garage, I saw Victoria approaching the building from the opposite direction. She was dressed in one of her signature professional outfits, carrying herself with the confident authority that had always characterized her public persona. When she spotted me, her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear. "Amanda," she said as we met near the building entrance, "what are you doing here?" "Client." "Meeting," I replied simply. Her face went pale as the implications registered. "Client meeting? With Sterling and Associates?" James Mitchell requested a consultation about strategic operational improvements. Victoria stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. The idea that her own boss had specifically sought out the sister she had dismissed as professionally worthless seemed to be breaking her brain in real time. "You had a meeting with James Mitchell," she repeated slowly. "And Rachel Torres, Michael Chen, and the business development director, whose name I didn't catch." "The senior leadership team," Victoria said faintly. "You met with the senior leadership team. They've engaged Phoenix Dynamics for a comprehensive operational transformation. I'll be leading the project personally." The blood drained from Victoria's face entirely. Not only had her supposedly worthless sister impressed her boss enough to win a major consulting contract, but I would be working directly with Sterling and Associates' senior leadership team on strategic initiatives that would affect the entire company. "Amanda, this is my workplace," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "These are my colleagues, my professional relationships. You can't just waltz in here and—" "And what?" I interrupted, my own voice remaining calm and professional. "Provide valuable strategic expertise that your company specifically requested? This is exactly what you're doing, isn't it?" Victoria's composure was cracking completely. "You're trying to sabotage my career because of what happened at my engagement party." The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. Victoria, Sterling and Associates contacted Phoenix Dynamics. They sought us out because they need help with operational challenges. This has nothing to do with you." "Everything has to do with me," she snapped. "This is my company. These are my relationships. And now you're going to be here undermining my professional reputation." Her assumption that my professional success was somehow an attack on her revealed more about her mindset than I think she realized. In Victoria's worldview, there wasn't room for both of us to be successful. My achievements necessarily diminished hers. My recognition automatically threatened her standing. Victoria, I'm here to help Sterling and Associates solve business problems. Your professional reputation will be determined by your own performance, not by mine. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising enough that other people entering the building were starting to notice our conversation. I've worked here for 5 years. I've built relationships, established my expertise, earned my position. And now you're going to come in as some kind of strategic genius and make me look incompetent by comparison. The honesty of her fear was both revealing and sad. Victoria had built her professional identity partly on being superior to me, and now she was facing the possibility that our colleagues would compare us directly and find her wanting. I'm not trying to make you look incompetent, I said gently. I'm trying to help your company solve operational challenges that are affecting everyone who works there. Including me, she replied bitterly. Including my ability to do my job, effectively when the senior leadership team is comparing me to my supposedly brilliant sister. Before I could respond, the building entrance doors opened and James Mitchell emerged, apparently heading out for another meeting. When he saw Victoria and me standing together, his expression shifted to one of professional interest. Victoria, he said warmly. Perfect timing. I wanted to let you know that we've just engaged Phoenix Dynamics for a strategic transformation project. Your sister will be leading the initiative. Victoria's forced smile was painful to watch. How wonderful, she managed. I'm sure Amanda will do excellent work for Sterling and Associates. I'm particularly impressed with her analysis of our client retention challenges, James continued, apparently oblivious to the tension between Victoria and me. She identified systemic issues that we hadn't connected before. Amanda has always been very analytical, Victoria replied, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining professional politeness. I'm looking forward to working with both of you, James said before departing toward his car. After he was gone, Victoria and I stood in awkward silence for several moments. Finally, she spoke. This is going to destroy everything I've built here, she said quietly. Or it's going to help you build something better, I replied. Sterling and Associates has genuine operational challenges that are affecting everyone's ability to succeed. Solving those problems will make your job easier, not harder. Victoria looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It contained hurt, fear, anger, and something that might have been the beginning of grudging respect. I don't know how to handle this, she admitted. For 5 years, I've been the successful sister, the one with the stable career and professional recognition. And now you're going to be working with my boss on strategic initiatives that I couldn't even identify, let alone solve. The vulnerability in her admission was unprecedented in our relationship. Victoria was acknowledging, perhaps for the first time, that her understanding of our respective capabilities might have been flawed. Victoria, we don't have to be in competition with each other, I said. There's room for both of us to be successful. Is there? She asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to prove that everything I thought I knew about business strategy was wrong. I considered her question carefully before answering. Maybe some of what you thought was wrong, but that doesn't make you incompetent or worthless. It just means you have things to learn, like everyone else. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. 3 weeks ago, I called you worthless at my engagement party. Now you're about to become the most influential strategic consultant at my company. How am I supposed to process that? By recognizing that success isn't a zero-sum game, I replied. And by understanding that the sister you dismissed might actually have valuable capabilities that you never bothered to recognize. As Victoria walked into the Sterling and Associates building and I headed toward my car, I realized that our relationship had crossed a fundamental threshold. The dynamic that had defined us since childhood, with Victoria as the successful sister and me as the disappointing one, had been permanently altered. She would have to find a new way to understand herself that didn't depend on my failure, and I would have to navigate a professional relationship with the sister who had spent years undermining my confidence and reputation. The transformation was more complete than I could have imagined 3 weeks earlier. Not only had I reclaimed my professional identity and proven my strategic expertise, but I had done so in the very environment where Victoria had built her own sense of success. The worthless sister had become the strategic consultant that Sterling and Associates specifically requested, and there was no way to undo that reality or return to our previous dynamic. The real confrontation was just beginning. 6 months after beginning the Sterling and Associates transformation project, I stood in the same conference room where I had first presented my strategic analysis. But everything had changed. The quarterly review meeting included not only James, Mitchell and his senior leadership team, but also representatives from 3 other companies that had sought Phoenix Dynamics consulting services based on Sterling and Associates' dramatic operational improvements. The results speak for themselves, James was saying as he clicked through a presentation showing Sterling and Associates' performance metrics. Client retention has improved by 43%. Employee satisfaction scores have increased by 60%, and our operational efficiency measures show improvements across every major category. The transformation had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. By realigning their business development approach with their actual service capabilities, Sterling and Associates had begun attracting clients who were genuinely good fits for their expertise. The workflow improvements had eliminated the bottlenecks that had been creating internal stress and client dissatisfaction. Most importantly, the cultural changes had created an environment where talented employees wanted to stay and contribute to long-term success, rather than just collecting paychecks while looking for better opportunities. What's particularly impressive, added Rachel Torres, is how sustainable these improvements have proven to be. We're not just seeing temporary boosts in performance, we're seeing fundamental changes in how we operate as a company. I nodded, pleased but not surprised by their sustained success. The strategic framework I had developed was designed specifically to create compounding benefits rather than quick fixes. By addressing the underlying relationship and cultural issues that had been driving Sterling and Associates' challenges, we had created conditions where continuous improvement became the natural result of daily operations. Amanda's approach was unlike anything we had experienced with previous consultants, Michael Chen observed. Instead of imposing external solutions, she helped us identify our own strengths and figure out how to leverage them more effectively. The compliment was gratifying, but what pleased me most was seeing how Sterling and Associates had internalized the collaborative principles that formed the foundation of my consulting methodology. They weren't just implementing techniques I had taught them. They were applying the underlying philosophy to new challenges and opportunities. Victoria had been present for this quarterly review, sitting quietly at the far end of the conference table. Over the past 6 months, our professional relationship had evolved in ways that neither of us could have predicted. The initial tension and fear she had expressed had gradually given way to something more complex. A mixture of grudging respect, lingering resentment, and genuine curiosity about strategic thinking approaches she had never encountered before. The most significant change had been in how Victoria's colleagues related to both of us. Instead of seeing me as the disappointing sister who had somehow stumbled into an undeserved opportunity, they now recognized me as the strategic consultant whose expertise had transformed their workplace. Instead of seeing Victoria as the clearly superior sister, they now understood that we each brought different but valuable capabilities to professional environments. I want to share something that I think illustrates the broader impact of this transformation, James Mitchell said, turning toward Victoria. Victoria, would you mind telling everyone about the client development initiative you proposed last month? Victoria straightened in her chair, and I could see her gathering confidence as she prepared to speak. I've been working with some of our longest-term clients to identify expansion opportunities within their organizations," she began. "Instead of always looking for new accounts, I realized we could grow our business by deepening our relationships with existing clients who already trust our capabilities." The initiative was smart, practical, and perfectly aligned with the relationship-focused strategic principles that had guided the overall Sterling and Associates transformation. What struck me most was that Victoria had developed this approach independently, applying insights she had absorbed during the consulting process to create her own innovative solutions. "The results have been excellent," Rachel Torres added. "Victoria's relationship expansion approach has generated more new revenue in 3 months than our traditional business development tactics typically produce in a year." I found myself genuinely proud of Victoria's accomplishment. She had taken strategic concepts that initially threatened her professional identity and used them to enhance her own capabilities rather than simply resenting their effectiveness. "That's a perfect example of how organizational transformation creates opportunities for individual growth," I said, speaking directly to Victoria for the first time during the meeting. "You've taken collaborative principles and applied them in ways that leverage your natural relationship-building skills." Victoria's expression was complicated as she met my eyes across the conference table. "I learned from watching how you approached client relationships," she admitted. "It took me a while to understand that strategic thinking and relationship focus could work together instead of being in competition." The acknowledgement was unprecedented in our relationship. Victoria was publicly crediting me with insights that had enhanced her own professional performance. Even more significantly, she was doing so in front of colleagues who had previously heard her describe me as professionally worthless. After the meeting concluded and the clients departed, Victoria approached me as I was packing up my presentation materials. "Amanda, do you have a few minutes to talk?" she asked, her tone more tentative than I was accustomed to hearing from her. "Of course." We walked to a small coffee area adjacent to the conference room, a quiet space where Sterling and Associates employees often held informal conversations away from the bustle of the main office. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said without preamble once we were seated. "Not just for what I said at my engagement party, but for years of diminishing your capabilities and undermining your confidence." The directness of her admission caught me off guard. Victoria had never been one for emotional vulnerability or explicit acknowledgments of wrongdoing. "I was protecting my own ego," she continued. "It was easier to believe that you were failing because you lacked talent than to consider that you might be struggling because the systems weren't designed to recognize what you had to offer." I studied her face, trying to assess whether this apparent change in perspective was genuine or merely a strategic response to our altered circumstances. "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Watching you work," she replied simply. "Seeing how you approach problems, how you think about relationships and systems and long-term consequences. I realized that the skills I had dismissed as impractical were actually more sophisticated than anything I had developed in my own career." The honesty in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt some of the defensive walls I had built around our relationship beginning to soften. "Victoria, I never wanted us to be in competition with each other. I always hoped we could find ways to support each other's success." "I know that now," she said, "but I was so invested in being the successful sister that I couldn't imagine any other dynamic between us. Your success felt like it automatically diminished mine." We sat in comfortable silence for several moments, both processing the implications of this conversation for our relationship going forward. "There's something else I need to tell you," Victoria said finally. "I've been thinking about making a career change." "What kind of change?" "I want to develop my own strategic consulting practice, not competing with Phoenix Dynamics, but focusing on relationship-based business development for smaller marketing agencies." The announcement was both surprising and logical. Victoria had clearly absorbed many of the strategic thinking principles I had introduced at Sterling and Associates, and her natural relationship building skills would indeed be valuable in a consulting context. That sounds like an excellent fit for your capabilities, I said sincerely. I was hoping you might be willing to provide some guidance as I develop my approach, she said, the request clearly requiring considerable courage for her to voice. The irony was profound. The sister who had spent years dismissing my consulting work as worthless was now asking for my mentorship as she entered the same field. But beneath the irony, I could see genuine respect for my expertise and authentic desire to learn from my experience. I'd be happy to help, I replied. Strategic consulting is challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding when you find the right approach. Victoria's smile was the first genuinely warm expression I had seen from her in years. Thank you, Amanda. I know I don't deserve your support after everything I've said and done, but I'm grateful for your willingness to help. We're family, I said simply. That means something, regardless of our professional dynamics. As Victoria returned to her desk and I prepared to leave Sterling and Associates, I reflected on how completely our relationship had been transformed. The sister who had publicly humiliated me at her engagement party was now seeking my professional guidance. The family dynamic that had positioned me as the disappointment and her as the success story had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more authentic. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. Victoria and David were hosting a small dinner party to celebrate their engagement, and they specifically wanted to include the family members and colleagues who had supported them through their relationship. The invitation was elegant but personal, nothing like the formal affair of their original engagement party. The dinner was held at Victoria and David's apartment in Belltown, a space that reflected their combined personalities without the pretentious grandeur that had characterized the hotel ballroom event. The guest list was small and carefully chosen: our parents, David's family, and a few close friends and colleagues from both of their professional circles. Marcus Rodriguez was there, the Phoenix Dynamics colleague who had originally brought my work to Elena Blackwood's attention. James Mitchell attended with his wife, and several other Sterling and Associates employees who had become genuine friends rather than just professional contacts were also present. I want to make a toast, Victoria announced as we gathered around their dining table with glasses of wine. 6 months ago, I made some comments at our first engagement party that I deeply regret. I allowed my own insecurities to lead me to publicly diminish someone who deserved nothing but love and respect. The room was quiet as Victoria continued, her voice steady but emotional. My sister Amanda has always been brilliant, strategic, and capable. The fact that I couldn't recognize those qualities says nothing about her and everything about my own limitations. Tonight, I want to celebrate not just David's and my engagement, but also the professional success that Amanda has, earned through her talent, hard work, and perseverance. She raised her glass toward me. To Amanda, who has taught me that true success means lifting others up rather than tearing them down. The toast was followed by warm applause and expressions of support from everyone present. But what moved me most was seeing our parents' faces. Mom was crying softly, clearly relieved that her daughters had found a way to support rather than compete with each other. Dad's expression showed pride in both of us. The complicated pride of a parent watching his children navigate difficult relationships and emerge stronger. After dinner, as the evening was winding down, Elena Blackwood arrived for dessert and coffee. Her presence at this intimate family gathering felt significant, a signal that she considered me more than just another employee. I have an announcement, Elena said as we gathered in Victoria and David's living room. Phoenix Dynamics has been invited to establish a strategic consulting practice in Portland, and I'd like Amanda to lead that expansion. The opportunity was both exciting and daunting. Leading Phoenix Dynamics' expansion into a new market would be a significant step forward in my career, with responsibilities and visibility that would establish me as one of the Pacific Northwest's most prominent strategic consultants. The Portland market has been asking for exactly the kind of relationship-focused consulting approach that Amanda has perfected here in Seattle, Elena continued. This would be a chance to build something from the ground up while maintaining connection to our established Seattle operations. What would that mean practically? I asked. You'd be the managing director of Phoenix Dynamics Portland, with full authority to develop the practice according to your strategic vision. We're prepared to make whatever investment is necessary to ensure your success. The title and responsibilities represented validation beyond anything I could have imagined during my freelance years. Managing Director of a Phoenix Dynamics Regional office would position me as a senior executive in one of the most respected consulting firms on the West Coast. I'm honored by your confidence in me, I said carefully. Can I take some time to consider the implications before making a decision? Of course, Elena replied. But I hope you'll seriously consider it. This is exactly the kind of leadership opportunity that your strategic expertise has earned. After Elena departed and the other guests gradually said their goodbyes, I found myself alone with Victoria and David in their kitchen, helping clean up the remnants of the dinner party. Are you going to take the Portland position? Victoria asked as she loaded dishes into their dishwasher. I'm not sure yet. It's an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving Seattle just as I've finally found my professional footing here. Victoria dried her hands on a kitchen towel and turned to face me directly. Amanda, you should take it. This is your chance to build something completely your own, without any of the complicated history that exists here. The generous perspective surprised me. I had expected Victoria to encourage me to stay, given how much our relationship had improved over the past months. You don't think I should stay and continue developing our professional collaboration? I asked. I think you should go to Portland and show another city what strategic consulting looks like when it's done right, she replied firmly. You've already proven everything you needed to prove here. Now it's time to build something that's entirely yours. David nodded in agreement. Victoria's right. You've transformed Sterling and Associates, established Phoenix Dynamics as Seattle's premier consulting firm, and completely changed how people in this city think about strategic business analysis. Portland deserves to benefit from what you've learned. Their encouragement felt like the final piece of my professional transformation. The sister who had once seen my success as a threat to her own was now actively supporting my advancement to even greater opportunities. There's one condition, Victoria added with a slight smile. I want to be your first Portland client when I launch my own consulting practice. The request was both practical and symbolic. Victoria was acknowledging my expertise while also claiming her own place in the strategic consulting field we would both be working in. Deal, I said, extending my hand for a formal handshake that dissolved into a hug. 3 months later, I stood in my new office on the 26th floor of a downtown Portland high-rise, looking out at the Willamette River and the mountains beyond. Phoenix Dynamics Portland had officially opened with 5 employees and 3 confirmed clients, but inquiries were coming in faster than we could process them. The strategic consulting approach I had developed in Seattle was proving even more effective in Portland, where the business community was hungry for alternatives to traditional consulting methods. Our collaborative, relationship-focused methodology was attracting clients who had been disappointed by the adversarial approaches of larger consulting firms. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Just landed my first client for Hayes Strategic Consulting, a mid-sized marketing agency that needs help with relationship-based business development. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. The message was followed by a photo of Victoria in her own office, a small but professional space where she was building the consulting practice we had discussed. Her success felt like validation of everything I believed about the power of collaborative approaches to business and personal relationships. That evening, I called our parents to update them on Phoenix Dynamics Portland's progress and Victoria's consulting launch. I'm so proud of both of you, Mom said, her voice full of emotion. You've found ways to support each other's success instead of competing for it. It wasn't easy, I admitted. We had to completely rethink how we understood ourselves and each other. The most important relationships usually require that kind of rethinking, Dad observed. The fact that you were both willing to do the work says everything about your character. As I hung up the phone and returned to reviewing client proposals, for the next day's meetings, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been a struggling freelancer whose own sister used her professional failures as entertainment at social gatherings. Now I was the managing director of a strategic consulting firm, leading an expansion that was already exceeding all projections for success. But the professional transformation, significant as it was, felt less important than the personal one. I had reclaimed not just my career trajectory, but my confidence in my own judgment and worth. I had learned to advocate for myself effectively while maintaining the collaborative principles that formed the foundation of my approach to both business and relationships. Most importantly, I had discovered that success didn't require choosing between personal authenticity and professional achievement. The strategic consulting methodology that was attracting clients and generating revenue was built on the same collaborative, relationship-focused principles that had guided my personal growth throughout this entire journey. The sister who had called me worthless at her engagement party was now seeking my professional guidance as she built her own consulting practice. The family dynamic that had positioned us as competitors had evolved into a relationship based on mutual support and genuine respect for each other's capabilities. The transformation was complete, but it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where success was measured not just by individual achievement, but by the ability to create opportunities for others to succeed as well. The worthless sister had become a strategic consultant, a mentor, and ultimately, a leader who understood that the most sustainable success comes from lifting others up rather than climbing over them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.